Now let's start with prayer. Um, Heavenly Father, we give thanks to you for this day to be together, study your word. We would pray an intercessory prayer for the victims of the wars taking place both in Ukraine and Israel, Sudan, Syria. The whole place seems to be in turmoil at this point, and certainly indicating that your return is not far off. We ask you, Lord, to continue to strengthen us and in spirit with the knowledge and the truth of your love. And I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Okay. Everybody back again. Oh, we lost somebody again. We keep losing whoever. Is that Buddy?
It's Robert. He's having trouble.
Okay. All right. Let's begin then. Chapter 22. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to Aaron and to his sons, that they keep apart from the sacred donations of the Israelites, lest they profane my holy name, which they consecrate to me. I am the Lord. Say to them, to your generations, any man of all your seed who draws near the sacred donations that the Israelites consecrate to the Lord with his uncleanliness upon him, that person shall be cut off from before me. I am the Lord. Any man, whoever from the seed of Aaron, when he is smitten with skin blanch or discharged from his members, shall not eat of the sacred donations until he becomes clean, nor he who touches anything unclean through a dead person, nor a man who has an emission of seed, nor a man who has touched any swimming thing, by which one becomes unclean, or a human being by which one becomes unclean, with any uncleanliness. A person who touches these shall be unclean till evening, and shall not eat of the sacred donations until he bathes his body in water and the sun sets and he becomes clean. And after he may eat of the sacred donations, for it is his bread. A beast that has died or one torn by predators, he shall not eat, to be defiled by it. I am the Lord, and they shall keep my watch and not bear offense for it and die through it when they profane it. I am the Lord who hallows them, and no outsider shall eat a sacred donation. A priest resident hireling shall not eat the sacred donation, and should a priest buy a person as the purchase of his silver, that person may eat of it, and who is born in his household, they may eat of his bread. And should a priest's daughter be married to an outsider, she shall not eat of the levy of the sacred donations. And should a priest's daughter become a widow or divorced, having no seed, and she come back to her father's house in her youth of her fathers, did I meet a bread or something there?
Bread, yes.
Yeah.
She may eat.
He may eat, but no outsider shall eat of it. And should a man eat the sacred donation in errants, he shall add a fifth of its value to it and give the sacred donation to the priest. They shall not profane the sacred donation of the Israelites that they set aside for the Lord, causing them to bear the punishment of the guilt for having eaten of their sacred donation. For I am the Lord who hallows them. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to Aaron and to his sons and to the Israelites, And you shall say to them, every man of the house of Israel and of the sojourner in Israel who brings forward his offering for any of their volative offerings or their free will offerings that they bring forward to the Lord as burnt offerings to be acceptable for you. It shall be an unblemished male from the cattle, the sheep, or the goats. Whatever has a defect you shall not bring forward, for it will not be acceptable, and you acceptable for you. And should a man bring forward a communion sacrifice to the Lord to set aside as a votive offering or free will offering from the cattle or from the flock, it shall be unblemished to be acceptable. No defect shall be in it. Anything blind or broken or lacerated or with a wen or scar or skin flake, these you shall not bring forward to the Lord, and no fire offering from them shall you put on the altar to the Lord. And a bull or sheep with a stretched or crimped limb, you may make a free will offering, but it shall not be acceptable as a votive offering. A votive offering. And anything with a crushed or smashed or torn, cut off testes, you shall not bring forward to the Lord. And in your land you shall not do it. And from the hand of the foreigner you shall not bring forward your God's bread from any of these. Their deformity is in them. A defect is in them. They shall not be acceptable for you. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, when a bull or goat is born, it shall be 7 days under its mother, and from the 8th day onward it is acceptable as an offering, fire offering to the Lord. And a bull or sheep you shall not sacrifice it with its young on the same day. And when you sacrifice a thanksgiving sacrifice to the Lord, you shall sacrifice it so as to be acceptable for you. On that day it shall be eaten, and you shall leave nothing of it till morning. I am the Lord. And you shall keep my commandments and do them. I am the Lord. And you shall not profane my holy name. And I shall be hallowed in the midst of the Israelites. I am the Lord, who hallows you, bringing you out of the land of Egypt to be God for you. I am the Lord. That they keep apart the okay. This is verse 2. Dave, you want to take that?
Yeah. They keep apart the syntactical, interpolation.
Okay, the syntactical interpolation of the clause. That's a way of saying that interpolation is moving of the words around. So it's according to syntax.
Okay. After this, one makes the sentence slightly unclear, but the evident motive is to affect a strong thematic juxtaposition of the antonyms, sacred donations, and profane, with the verb's direct object, my holy name, reinforcing the link between divine sacredness and the sacred donations. It may at first seem puzzling that the priest should be enjoined to keep apart from the sacred donations of sacrificial animals that were, after all, their sustenance. But the next verse makes clear that this warning to the priest obtains in cases when they are in a state of ritual impurity. And so Rashi observes, who draws near? As Jacob the Milgrom repeatedly notes, this all-purpose verb in context of ritual prohibition means to encroach, though when the ritual act is permitted, it means more neutrality, to enter into the sacred zone. Shall be cut off from before me. The more common location in Leviticus is cut off from his kin. This variation may suggest divestment from priestly privileges, being cut off from the sacerdotal line. Sacerdotal. A human being. This noun is the object of a double duty verb, touched. For it is his bread. As often elsewhere, bread is a synerduce.
Syndicate.
Syndicate?
Yeah.
Okay. For food. In fact, the typical sacred donation would have been meat. Bear offense for it and die through it. Both of the pronouns here are masculine, though the only adjacent noun that might be a candidate for an antecedent watch is feminine. Various efforts to rescue grammatical consistency that the antecedent is an elated my holy name seems strained. It is more likely that the requirements of gender consistency of modern Western language did not altogether obtain for biblical grammar, and that it seemed natural to use a masculine form for impersonal constructions such as bear offense for it, regardless of the antecedents. The priest's resident hireling, followed by Jacob Milgrom, argues persuasively that the phrase literally priest, residence, and hireling is a hina.
I don't know.
Indictus.
In today's whatever.
Indictus.
And okay, like the use of toshav in other combinations, it does not refer to two entities. And they shall not profane, as the end of this sentence in the next verse makes clear, they refers to the priests who would profane the sacred donations by allowing unfit lay persons to incur guilt by eating them. This whole clause mirrors the language of the opening verse, thus forming an envelope structure to bring this entire unit of the chapter to a close. 19, to be acceptable for you, literally for your favor, for your finding favor, being acceptable in the eyes of God. Whatever has a defect, you shall not bring forward, as many commentators have noted. The list of deformities for the animals unfit for the cult parallels the list of deformities for priests unfit for the cult in the previous chapter. The terms used, however, are different. 22, anything blind. The Hebrew uses the term for the disease blindness, but then switches to the male singular beast bearing the defect. Broken, presumably broken-limbed, and lacerated, and then the symptoms of disease. Wind, scab, skin flake. Is that like leprosy? Something like
Not
that?
on an animal that's, but it's talking about a diseased animal.
Category consistency does not appear to have been a requirement of ancient Hebrew idiomatic usage. 24, crushed or smashed or torn off or cut off. The list appears to be arranged in ascending order of the severity of the mutilation. And in your land you shall not do. This sounds like a general ban on gelding, which, however, would have had a necessary role in animal husbandry. One may tentatively adopt Milgram's proposal that the reference is to regional sanctuaries beyond the principal one, since Leviticus does not assume that there is one exclusive sanctuary. Do it, then, would mean perform the sacrifice. 25, from the hand of the foreigner you shall not bring forward for any of these. This warning is intended to preclude the notion that a maimed animal is permitted for sacrifice in cases where the maiming has not been done by an Israelite, but by a foreigner from whom the animal is purchased. 27. So they said if it was maimed, if the animal is maimed, it was like if it was gelded, that's a form of maiming.
Well, it would be
Both.
considered form, yes. It makes the animal no longer
Unfit.
fit for reproduction.
Okay.
Now, all of these prohibitions have to do with the animal being a healthy specimen, an acceptable sacrifice. And then these are the things you're not supposed to present. And you find in later books of the Old Testament where this, especially at the time, Jeroboam and like after that, of animals being presented for sacrifice that were unacceptable and actually used for sacrifice.
Okay, this warning is intended to preclude the notion that a maimed animal is permitted for sacrifice in cases where the maiming has not been done by an Israelite, but by a foreigner from whom the animal is purchased. 27, it shall be 7 days under its mother. A humanitarian rationale for this law is unconvincing because, after all, on the 8th day, the suckling animal can be slaughtered and offered up on the altar. It is more likely that the newborn beast was not regarded as a viable living creature, and hence fit for sacrifice until it had attained its 8th day of life, the day designated for the circumcision of Israelite males. This correspondence of 8 days between man and beast may be another instance of analogical thinking. Was that it?
Yeah.
That's it. All right. So what did you all get out of that chapter?
Lots of rules and regulations again.
Yeah, but what they are about? They're about
Keeping it,
sacrifice, about
keeping it important and the best of the bunch.
yeah, and you don't give to God something that you consider worthless. That, that's what I got out of all that. What about you, buddy?
Well, yeah, I was about to say there is that. I mean, it's probably, when you have these sacrificial laws, it's, tempting for somebody who said, well, here's an animal I was going to get rid of anyway, right? Here's something that I can't use. I will, give this to the priest for the sacrifice, for my obligatory sacrifice. But beyond that, I was kind of thinking about Peter's vision in the 10th chapter of Acts, where he sees the vision, reptiles and pterodactyls, I don't know, whatever, snakes, eat, right? So at that point, he reports the notion that God has permitted, he has kind of done away with these dietary rules. Eat whatever you want, have roadkill stew. It doesn't that's not what makes a person
but I don't.
holy.
I
So
don't think
there's
that was the point of that so much as
well,
to accept the
well,
Gentile.
no, I was getting to that, right? That's an interpretation of that. But then there are other groups. You find groups of Christians and commentators who say exactly what you were saying. That wasn't the point, right? In groups even returning, to the old rules like the Seventh Day Adventists and the Messianic Jews, Messianic Christian Jews, or whatever. We kind of return to that. So there's that. But beyond that, there's a point, I think it's in one of the Gospels, Christ is talking to the Pharisees.
Yeah.
And the Pharisees are saying, well, these laws were given to us by Moses. And Christ's response is, they were given to you because of your hardness of heart. So it's that hardness of heart that I'm curious about, that I'd like to talk about. Like, what is this hardness of heart? Were these people, perceived as being like so demanding that they needed exact rules, or they didn't get the spirit of things? They needed things spelled out. What is this hardness of heart?
Okay, first let's go back to where that is said, and that has to do with divorce. And said Moses gave you the this option because you would not accept what God had set up initially, and it became too difficult for the person. There's always considered a victim in this, that he allowed you to divorce and to allowed your wife to go away with a certificate making her eligible for somebody else. But that's not what he wanted. He wanted you to work it out and forgive one another and work it through. He didn't make you. He put you together. He really doesn't want you to be separate. That's what Christ was saying there.
So when he refers to
was not forgiving.
When he refers to the law, I mean this whole book, the Torah, is the law. So your response would be that he's just referring to the portion of the law that refers to divorce action.
I believe that's what
divorce protocol.
I believe that's what he was talking to.
Okay.
Okay. The second here, as you're reading through it, this discussion concerning acceptable sacrifice takes me all the way back to Cain and Abel. And you see what's happening there. And one was a gift from something that was precious to the individual, versus what appears to have been something that, King just threw it together. And that's for us to learn as far as our offerings to the Lord. Then there was the other discussion of touching it and the like, and you see Christ touching those who are unclean, making that which is unacceptable acceptable, all restoring what was originally created. So those are the things that I got from that chapter.
Okay.
And I don't eat roadkill.
Well, it's interesting that that Cain and Abel analogy, it pops up a whole lot in Eastern Orthodox homilies and sermons, even though the gospel of reading of the day, of course, is always from the Gospels, right? But for some reason, that Cain and Abel analogy pops up quite a bit.
Yeah, well,
from Orthodox priests.
okay. Shall we go on then? Or does anybody have anything else they want to say before we go? Okay, Robert, are you still with us? Lost him again.
He keeps coming in and out. I don't know. He's must be having technical issues.
Yeah. Okay. Well, buddy, why don't you take chapter 23?
Okay. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the Israelites, and you shall say to them, these are the fixed times of the Lord, which you shall call sacred, which you shall call sacred convocations. These are my fixed times. 6 days shall tasks be done, and on the seventh day an absolute Sabbath, a sacred convocation. No task shall you do. It is a Sabbath for the Lord in all your dwelling places. These are the fixed times of the Lord, sacred convocations, which you shall call in their fixed time." In the first month, on the 14th of the month, at twilight, a Passover offering to the Lord, and on the 15th day of the month, a festival of flatbread to the Lord. 7 days you shall eat flatbread. On the first day, a sacred convocation you shall have. No task of work shall you do, and you shall bring forward a fire offering to the Lord 7 days. On the seventh day, a sacred convocation, no task of work shall you do. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the Israelites, and you shall say to them, when you come into the land that I am about to give you, and you reap its harvest, you shall bring a sheaf, first of your harvest, to the priest, and he shall elevate the sheaf before the Lord to be acceptable for you. From the morrow of the Sabbath, the priest shall elevate it. And on the day you elevate the sheaf, you shall do an unblemished yearling lamb. You shall do an unblemished yearling lamb as a burnt offering to the Lord, and its grain offering 2/10 of an ephah of semolina mixed with oil, a fire offering to the Lord, a fragrant odor, and its wine libation, a quarter of hin.
Okay, that's a measurement, a quarter of a hin.
Hin.
How do you have that spelled there? I have H-I-N.
H-I-N. I've got my Hebrew dictionary here, but I don't know what it means. I could look it up in a minute. But and bread and mass roast grain and fresh ears you shall not eat until this very day, until you bring your God's offering, an everlasting statute for your generations in all your dwelling places. And you shall count you from the morrow of the Sabbath, from the day you bring the elevation sheaf. 7 whole weeks shall they be. Until the morrow of the 7th Sabbath, you shall count 50 days, and you shall bring forward a new grain offering to the Lord. From your dwelling places, you shall bring 2 loaves of elevation bread, 2/10 of an ephah of semolina. They shall be leavened, they shall be baked first fruits to the Lord. And you shall bring forward with the bread 7 unblemished yearling lambs, and 1 bull from the herd, and 2 rams. They shall be a burnt offering to the Lord, and their grain offering and their libations, a fire offering, a fragrant odor to the Lord. And you shall do 1 he goat as an offense offering, and 2 yearling lambs as a communion sacrifice. And the priest shall elevate them with the bread of first fruits as an elevation before the Lord, with the 2 lambs. They shall be holy for the Lord, for the priest. And on the very day you shall eat a sacred convocation. It shall be for you. No task of work shall you do. An everlasting statute in all your dwellings for your generations. And when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not finish off the edge of your field in your reaping, nor gather the gleanings of your harvest. For the poor and for the sojourner you shall leave them. I am the Lord your God. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the Israelites, saying, In the 7th month, on the 1st of the month, you shall have a Sabbath, a commemoration with horn blasts, a sacred convocation. No task of work shall you do, and you shall bring forward a fire offering to the Lord. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Yet on the 10th of this 7th month is the Day of Atonement, a sacred convocation. It shall be for you, and you shall afflict yourselves and bring forward a fire offering to the Lord. And no task shall you do on the very day, for it is a day of atonement, to atone for you before the Lord your God. For every person who is not afflicted on this day shall be cut off from his kin. And any person who does any task on this very day shall make that person perish from the midst of his people. No task shall you do, an everlasting statute for your generation in all your dwelling places. An absolute Sabbath it is for you. And you shall afflict yourselves so the 9th of the month, on the evening, from evening to evening, you shall keep your Sabbath. And so the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the Israelites, saying, On the 15th day of the 7th month, the festival of huts, 7 days to the Lord, Sukkot, I think it is. On the first day, a sacred convocation, no task of work shall you do. 7 days you shall bring forward a fire offering to the Lord. On the 8th day you shall have a sacred convocation and bring forward a fire offering to the Lord. It is a solemn gathering. No task of work shall you do. These are the fixed times of the Lord, which you shall call sacred convocations, to bring forward a fire offering to the Lord, burnt offerings and grain offering, sacrifice and libation, such thing on its day, besides the Lord's Sabbath, and besides your gifts, and besides all your votive offerings, and besides all your farewell offerings that you give to the Lord. Yet on the 15th day of the 7th month, when you gather in the yield of the land, you shall celebrate the Lord's festival 7 days. On the first day, a Sabbath, and on the 8th day a Sabbath. And you shall take you in the first day the fruit of a stately tree, fronds of palm trees, a branch of a leafy tree, and willows of the brook. And you shall rejoice before the Lord your God 7 days. And you shall celebrate it as a festival to the Lord 7 days in the year, an everlasting statute for your generations. In the 7th month you shall celebrate it. In huts you shall dwell 7 days. You shall dwell 7 days. All natives in Israel shall dwell in huts, so that your generation will know that I made the Israelites dwell in huts when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. And Moses spoke the fixed times of the Lord to the Israelites.
Okay, those huts, that was the Festival of Booths, right?
Yeah, it's still observed in the synagogue at Kolami up on 23rd East. There's a festival, and and usually it's a kind of festive occasion as opposed to, Yom Kippur. People are supposed to have fun, and so in the huts they'll have little booths, and people will be selling, fundraising gift items for the synagogue and the booths. It's supposed to a celebration, of being Jewish, celebrate, have fun.
Okay.
Is everyone allowed to attend?
Yeah, it's open. Usually it's announced, if you check the papers or whatever, and it's a fundraiser. I don't know if all synagogues do it the same way, but I know in Jewish, just a couple of years ago, I ordered something from a camera store in New York, and the photography business in New York City is dominated by Jewish people, I may add. I ordered something mail order, and I had to wait for a week for the festival to be over for this store, Autorama. Autorama is a big mail order business. I had to wait a week for this item to be shipped because it was closed for Sukkot.
Yeah.
In that community in New York observes the festivals very strictly.
What was the festival or the holiday on the 7th of October that they were celebrating?
Yom Kippur, I think.
And what does that have to do with?
That's the Day of Atonement.
Atonement?
I remember that specifically because the Yom Kippur War broke out in 73.
Yeah.
70, would have been 70, 73. And I had left Israel to work in England, and I tried to go back to Israel. I volunteered to work for the Red Cross, but they wouldn't have me. They wouldn't give me a visa. I remember it was October, and it was referred to as the Yom Kippur War.
So Israel wouldn't give you a visa?
Well, it had to do with England and America and Israel. I just heard an announcement, that they were the Red Cross was looking for volunteers. So I just left Israel. I had a lot of ties there, and I volunteered, but I had trouble getting a visa to re-enter the country, and then the war didn't last very long.
Well, what about this skirmish they had the other day? Wasn't that on the 7th of October?
Yes.
Yeah, it was almost another Yom Kippur War. Yeah.
The one in 73 lasted about 3 weeks.
Yeah, it wasn't very long. I tried to get the visa thing straightened out, and it wasn't worth it because by the time I I was even close to getting one, the war was over. So, and I had a job in England, so anyway.
All right. Let's go on to the next chapter then.
Anybody gonna do the footnotes or?
Yeah, let's do the
Yeah, that's up here.
one of the thoughts I had before when we were reading this, a Sabbath to the Lord, that word is also used for holiday. So it's a holiday to the Lord. It's separate, set apart for celebration with Him. Yeah. And keep that in mind when we read this stuff. Robert, can you take these? Oh, we lost him again? Okay.
Well, he just in and out. I don't know what's going
Okay.
on.
I'll read it if you want me to.
Okay, Dennis, why don't you take it?
6 days shall task be done. It is somewhat surprising, as commentaries from the Middle East onward have reflected, that after announcing a calendar of the sundry annual festivals fixed times, the text proceeds to spell out the weekly obligation of the Sabbath day. Rashi tries to reconcile the contradictions by proposing that the mention of the Sabbath is to indicate that the violation of the Sabbath and the violation of the festivals are equivalent in seriousness. But the consensus of modern scholarship is that these verses on the Sabbath were added, perhaps added out of later historical considerations, such as the impossibility of observing the pilgrims' festivals in the Babylonian exile. This addition would have been facilitated by a certain ambiguity in the word Sabbat, literally cessation, which can apply, as it does elsewhere in this chapter, not only of the weekly day of rest, but to a festival when most everyday tasks are also prohibited. An absolute Sabbath, the Hebrew uses a double construct that generally indicates a superlative Sabbath, Shabation, whatever. Sacred convocations, which you shall call. In this recurring phrase, the verb and its object are cognates, something that the translation imitates, at least etymologically, because convocation is derived from a Latin term for calling. Call in this context obviously means to proclaim, convene, invite. I had a question on the other readings. Was it meant that all of these sacrifices on these different, is each individual, or is it a family group, or is it a
This
one
is this is the worshiping convocation. So this is like they all come to the temple for that, where God places his name. But that concerning where he places his name doesn't come in at this point yet in time. So it's wherever they as a group gather.
Well, it tells of bringing the sheep, the lamb, the goat.
Yeah,
Is it for the whole tribe, or is it just each individual has to bring one of those? That's a lot of slaughtering.
yes, and it was the priest that did the slaughtering. They did it at the temple. The statements concerning this worshiping of the community. That was one of the things the priest did. Part of that sacrifice went to the priest. Part of that sacrifice went to the person offering the sacrifice also, depending on the sacrifice, of course. And we'd have to go back to those things that were ordered to be done and how they're to be done. But certain sacrifices are burnt offerings that means that it burned up. Others are the fat simply itself being burned up. So,
Well, I was more interested in the quantities.
I know. And Passover, the quantity was quite great. At other times, not so many. We also read in Samuel, Second Samuel, somewhere, David sacrificing and Solomon sacrificing, and we're talking about hundreds of animals. So yeah,
When it says "you shall," is meaning everybody, or
you shall.
groups?
Okay, depending on what the group is identified.
What if you didn't have an animal? Just a thought.
Then you bought one. That's how the priestly commerce started. Remember in the temple, at the temple?
Oh, yeah, that's right.
And I think that's the part of the point of Christ's comment on the sparrows. You can get them 2 for a penny,
Yeah.
right? Sparrows only cost 2 for a penny, but God pays as much attention to those and the hairs on your head as as anything else, because to answer Dave's question, if somebody really that was, down on their luck, when it showed up at the temple and wanted to buy an obligatory sacrifice, I always get some sparrows, 2 for a penny. Yeah.
So you can sacrifice a bird?
Oh yeah, doves mentioned in the New Testament.
Yeah.
And if you didn't have any money,
Well, you just go to hell in a handbasket, Dave.
Then Dave, if you had no money at all, if you were down and out on your luck, you might sit at the temple gates and beg.
Yeah,
Got
there you
something,
go.
then you could go in.
There you go.
Okay, that answered sort of.
But your answer, I mean, there were thousands of sheep that were slaughtered on Passover.
Okay,
That was a big deal. They did a production line thing to do that.
now that Passover, that pops up in Exodus. But prior to that, okay, they were sacrificing all the way back to
Well, yeah, you go back to
Abraham.
Abraham and before. Yeah.
and before.
Well,
okay.
Cain and Abel.
Well, you have Noah at the end of the flood, and then you come out, and then he sacrifices already then. So, yeah.
I think we're at 4, aren't we?
We're-
Sacred convocations which you shall call. In this recurring phrase, the verb and its object are, I think I read this one, something that translates an intimates at least, yeah, okay. We'll go down to 5. The first
Right.
month. As elsewhere, the calendar begins with the spring month that Exodus calls Abib, that will later be called Nisan. The present list does not use names for the month, simply referring to them by ordinal numbers. Passover offering, a festival of flatbread, the physical offering that tradition. Hang on a second, let me turn this off. A festival of flatbread, the Paschal offering, traditionally an English Passover offering, is stipulated for the first evening and the flatbread for the 7th day of the festival. On the historical relation between the two aspects of observance, see the comment on Exodus 12:17. Festival, the Hebrew, whatever, is a term reserved in biblical usage for pilgrims' festival, evidently derived from a verb that means to circle around or wend one's way. When the population of the countryside was enjoined to come to the sanctuary, sheaf, the early rabbis understood the term Omar, not as a reference to a bundle of grain, in this case of a late spring harvest, probably barley, but as a unit of dry measure. From the morrow of the Sabbath, this innocent-looking phrase is fraught with ambiguity that generates historical scission. The early rabbis understood Sabbath to refer to the first day of the Passover celebration. See the comment on verse 3. And this has been the normative system in Judaism ever since, for counting forward to the Festival of Weeks, Shavuot. The Karaites, among others, understood Sabbath here as a reference to the Sabbath day, although the question was raised whether this applied to the Sabbath occurring in the week of the Passover festival or the first Sabbath after the week. As a rule, issues of calendar were often defined for systematic divisions in Judaism. Whatever the reason of the rabbis, their construction of Sabbath as referencing to festivals seems implausible. Baruch, Levine, and Jacob Miglorum have variously understood Sabbath to mean week. in the present context. In verse 16, the phrase seventh Sabbath in fact seems to mean seventh week. They shall be holy for the Lord, for the priest. The syntactically is in a position that the first is a kind of gloss on it. In the case of this offering of the first fruits, the consecrated statue of the foodstuff holy for the Lord means not that they are to be consumed in fire on the altar, but that they are reserved exclusively for the use of the priest. A sacred convocation, it will be for you. The oddness of the syntax might conceivably reflect a scribble insertion here of a formula reiterated elsewhere. In independent clause, they find the complex syntactic unit, a sacred convocation, it will be for you. Here, however, a sacred convocation is already the object of the verb you shall call, and so it will be for you, seems not to belong. A commemoration with horn blast. Although the instrument used is not specific here, the reasonable assumption is that it is a ram's horn or shofar. The commemoration in question is the act of making God remember or take note of Israel through the ritual of horn blast. Some biblical scholars have detected a hint of an annual ceremony for the coronation of God, but the historical evidence for that vivid conjecture is scant. Yet the Hebrew, however, expresses opposition, but also a emphasis only. You shall afflict yourself in legal cultic context. This idiom refers primarily to fasting, a meaning perhaps reinforced by the fact that the noun in question, the ambiguous nefesh, can also mean both throat and appetite, though its most plausible sense in context is simply as an intensive form of the pronoun. From evening to evening, here is the phrase attached to the observance of a sacred day. Levine's reasonable inference is that the system of counting the day from sunset to sunset, standard in later Judaism, may not yet have been normative in the biblical period, and hence its binding application to the Day of Atonement had to be stipulated. You shall keep your Sabbath. More literally, shall cease your cessation. Solemn gathering. This is a single word in the Hebrew, asrik, elsewhere, also ashera, which appears to refer specifically to the cultic assembly at the end of the festival. Perhaps because of the verb from which it derives means to retain or to hold back. 40. Stately tree. In modern Hebrew, et hard has become to mean citrus tree, but that is only because in the late Second Temple period, this whole phrase was understood to refer to citron, and somewhat larger, bright yellow cousin of the lemon. Hadar, however, is a general term referring to majesty, stateliness, or splendor, and it is probable that the original instruction was to take the fruit of any grand-looking tree, not necessarily the fruit of a specific genus of a tree. You shall rejoice before the Lord your God. Injunction to rejoice occurs only in the case of Sukkoth, the fall festival of huts. One reason for this may be that this was the final harvest festival of the agricultural cycle, and hence the pilgrims, free from the need to hurry back to their farms to look after the next crop, could spend the full week in celebration at the sanctuary, where sacrifices were offered and attendant feasts enjoyed. In the climate of the land of Israel, this was the time, late September, early October, when the long, hot, dry season came to an end and the welcome autumnal rains were imminent. In precisely this connection, we know from the Nisan that the Sukkot celebration in the Second Temple included an elaborate ritual for invoking water for the land, a ritual explicitly represented as a peak of collective joy. I made the Israelites dwell in the huts. Huts were used for temporary shelter by farmers watching over their crops about to be harvested, and so may have been associated with this festival of the fall harvest. Milgrom suggests that the flood of pilgrims to the central sanctuary in this most popular of the pilgrims' festival compelled many of them to spend the week in huts or other temporary shelters, because the town itself could not have possibly provided the bulk of them with lodging. Whether the original explanation was an agricultural practice or in the material necessity for pilgrimage, a historical theological rationale is now provided. Moses spoke the fixed times. Here spoke was the obvious sense of enjoined, proclaimed, enunciated.
Okay.
Timely.
We're kind of short on time, so that's the end of the Bible study for today. Any final comments concerning what we've read?
So these temple rituals that they talk about, was everybody allowed to participate?
Well, in their respective parts, yes. If you were, now you couldn't come into the sanctuary, obviously, if you were unclean or anything like that. But those were mandatory celebrations, and the people were to come to that central location for that celebration. That's why, well, at the Lord's time, Jerusalem was so full on the Passover. And we read in John about the other festivals that he attended also. And so, yeah, that there were two that the males had to attend, but there were 6 total festivals.
So if you went to a synagogue, do they have temple rituals or whatever? Buddy?
Well, yeah, but the synagogue system kind of replaced the temple system after the fall of after the destruction of Israel in 70 AD. That's when the synagogue system kind of became what it is today.
That's
Started to become what it is today.
Yeah, that's why the sacrificial system stopped, because the place of sacrifice was supposed to be the temple.
But it seems to me that the LDS Church has taken that to the next level.
Yeah, there's no question about that.
And just in passing, when I flew over, we came up from the north. We flew in the other night, and all the temples are lit up like crazy up there. It's like you can see those things from outer space.
Up there, you mean here
in a
our
plane?
valley?
In a plane. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. But that's here in the valley, right? Because there's so many of them.
Well, yeah, every town's got one. Yeah.
Well, Salt Lake has several. Salt Lake County.
Mhm.
Well, just in passing, West Valley City here is the second largest city in the state. We don't have a temple. I don't know what's wrong with us. We're not worthy, I guess. Even Tooele got a temple. How does that work?
They
Well,
don't have a hill
they-
tall enough to have a temple that shines above everybody else.
In West Valley City?
Yeah.
Well, they put that one on Taylorsville right on the 215.
Well, that's right. So when you're driving down, you can see it from a long ways away.
You can, yeah, you definitely can, yeah.
Well, yes, their temple system is more their evangelism system to a certain extent.
I'm not saying that's a bad thing either. That's I just
Well,
I'm curious. I'm just curious to what goes on there. What's that all about? Yeah, I guess what
yeah.
I'll never know.